You never heard me using that argument. Never heard me using that argument. Why? Because I knew that in comparing, for example, various parallel accounts of Old Testament battles or movements of the people of Israel or whatever else it might be, if you had more than one account of it, the only way to accurately see what both of them were saying was to allow for differences. For example, one writer might identify an entire region by the name of the primary city, whereas someone else might be much more specific. And I realized somewhere along the lines, we do this all the time. When people ask, where do you live? Well, I live in Phoenix. And right now, technically, I do. But, I'll say, we came here in 1974, which is true. But we did not technically live in Phoenix in 1974. Where we lived was technically Glendale. But we told everybody we were moving to Phoenix. And when you leave Phoenix, you pretty much tell people you live in Phoenix. And even in the years that I've lived here, the borders between those cities have changed, expanded. There's another city up north called Peoria, which has gone way farther north than it used to be. Out into the places we used to go rabbit hunting and shoot model rockets off and shoot 300 Winchester Magnums off without worrying about where the bullet was going to land, because there wasn't anything out there but rattlesnakes and lizards. It's now just nothing but housing developments. So things have changed. So here's the point. These are notoriously the weakest kinds of arguments that can be used against an ancient text. Because if even today, I've lived in Glendale, then Phoenix, then Glendale, then Phoenix, and all that time, I've never differentiated that. Am I lying? Of course I'm not lying. Anybody who would say that's just foolish. You can't have a meaningful conversation with someone like that. Phoenix is the general descriptor, but you've got Glendale, you got Peoria, now you got Surprise and El Mirage, and these are all getting to be big places, and that's just on the west side of the valley. And then over on the other side, you got Tempe and Scottsdale and Mesa and Chandler and Gilbert and all these places, and eventually it's just all going to sort of creep together till Casa Grande is just a suburb, and then Tucson, and it's just the way it works. So we have GPS maps today. My Garmin heart rate monitor here, GPS, man. I did a 5.25 K run this morning, and I just used this heart rate, the whole 9 yards, and I've got a nice little map, shows exactly where I went, and can tell the difference between which side of the street I was on, and whole 9 yards. It's great, it's wonderful, but you got to realize this is really, really new technology. Especially millennials think we've always had cell phones with Google Maps on it. Trust me, we have not. We have not. Paper maps, I remember them well. Trying to get them folded. You could never get a map folded back up the way that no, it's impossible. Once it's unfolded, it's just sort of like something magical happens to it. You can't fold it back up again. Anyway, I've been reading a lot on my rides about, and again, this term shows you where you're from. Civil War, War of Northern Aggression, War between the states. Depends. I can sort of tell you almost. You can almost identify someone's hometown by how they identify it. I was just reading about, and this is interesting. If you have a northern rider, it's the First Battle of Bull Run. Southern rider, Manassas. Different names, and I have seen movie depictions of that first battle. That's where Thomas Jackson got his name Stonewall. And I have read a number of histories. And as I've tried to picture things, wow, there's a lot of variation. That was only 150, 160 years ago. A lot of variation. And people argue to this day, where this particular brigade was, or, where this battery was. And we can still go to the places. It's not like it was 2,000 years ago. And so arguments based upon figuring out directions of boat travel on water in an ancient text, I'm sorry, that's just the weakest, the most likely to trip us up. And that's the other thing we got to understand. When you're looking at ancient documents, the most likely people to be confused are not the writers of the ancient documents. They're us. We are so arrogant with our technology to think that, well, I can just determine, these writers are guilty until proven innocent. And so when I heard this, I was like, really? I can think of much tougher issues to deal with. Much tougher issues to deal with that do not involve whether eis taperon in Greek is to be understood one way or pros and all this kind of stuff. I was a little taken aback. I really was. This is not the kind of argument that I expected to be,
more than I can cover right now. But in that case, you've got Mark. He doesn't identify where it is, or the feeding of the 5,000. He doesn't say where it is. Luke says it was in Bethsaida, okay, or very close to it. Now, if you imagine the Sea of Galilee, this will be helpful. If you imagine the Sea of Galilee, it kind of looks like the continent of Africa, kind of. But if you imagine it as a clock, all right, because it's just the top half of the clock that's really important here. Bethsaida is around 12:30. Capernaum is between 10 and 11 o'clock, all right? And and the Gerasenes, that land over there, or what is it, the region of Gerasa, I think it is. I might be wrong with that, okay? But the region over there is a little bit lower than Capernaum. That's around 9 to 10 o'clock. All right, now, with that in mind, Mark doesn't tell us where it occurred. Luke says it happened in Bethsaida or very close. So imagine around 12:30. John and Matthew, they don't really give a location, but for what they say afterward, they're pretty compatible with Luke here. Now, what's interesting is what happens